Hopefully you've got some idea of what philosophy as a subject is now, but I said at the start, and I stand by this, that the best way to understand what philosophy is to just go out and do it and think about as many different areas of philosophy as you can, and that's what this course is designed to allow you to do. It should be clear, given what we've said about philosophy so far this week, that philosophy can be an incredibly broad subject just because there are so many different things that we can be interested in getting to think clearly about. So for that reason, this course emphatically doesn't aim to be in any way a complete introduction to philosophy. There's loads and loads of different branches and areas and topics of philosophy that we just don't have time to consider on this course. Some of the major ones include political philosophy, aesthetics, ancient philosophy, the study of other different periods in the history of thought, philosophy of language, philosophy of logic. We just unfortunately don't have space to consider all of those areas in this course, but perhaps in a future instance of this course we might be able to. But hopefully the material that we do cover is going to be enough to give you a sense of some of the sorts of questions that interest philosophers, that philosophers spend their time studying, and perhaps more importantly, give you a sense of the sorts of methods that philosophers use when they're trying to think about and make progress on those questions. Very lastly, I just want to try and use what we've been talking about this week to put some of the material that's coming up in the rest of the course in context. So the definition of philosophy that I've been trying to work towards and trying to explain is this thought that philosophy is the activity of working out the right way of thinking about things that are important to us. And I think you can understand all the different areas of philosophy that we'll be looking at over the rest of this course in that light. So different sorts of philosophers and different people working in different branches of philosophy have different thoughts about what they think is most important or most interesting to understand. So one way of thinking about what distinguishes the branches of philosophy is in terms of the different things that they think is most important or interesting about us in our lives. So next week we're going to be thinking about epistemology, the theory of knowledge. And we saw earlier on in this week's material that part of the reason for thinking about that might be just being guided by this thought that this capacity to know the world, for our minds to be in touch with the world and for us to be able to get things right or wrong about the world is something really sort of fundamentally interesting and important about us. After that, we're going to look at the philosophy of mind. So you might think that one thing that is also really important about us, or perhaps even more important than our capacity to have knowledge, is various stuff to do with the fact that we have minds. So we have beliefs, we have conscious experiences, we have emotions, and they all seem to be bound up with this puzzling fact about ourselves that we have minds whereas other things in the universe don't have minds. Now, why is that? How should we think about that fact, and what's involved in thinking clearly about the fact that we have a mind? Then we're going to go on to look at some issues in moral philosophy. So again, you might think that something really important and interesting about us is the fact that the world around us and things that happen in it can show up as right or wrong for us. They can show up as good or bad for us. And so we're going to spend some time thinking about what that actually means, what it is for something to be right or wrong, good or bad, and what our access to these ethical facts might actually consist in, or perhaps even if there are ethical facts for us to have access to. Then we're also going to think about some issues in the philosophy of science. Again, to tie that into what we've been talking about, you might think that the fact that we have so much scientific knowledge and that it seems to be such a successful way of explaining and predicting what goes on in the world is something really interesting and important and crying out for explanation. So what is the nature of scientific knowledge? What distinguishes scientific knowledge from non-scientific knowledge? And why is it that scientific knowledge is so successful and such a good way apparently of getting in touch with the world? So one of the things that we're going to think about in that week is the question of whether or not scientific theories are really true, in the sense of whether or not they really map some kind of mind-independent reality, or whether or not we have to think about them in a different way. Finally, we're going to think about some issues in a very general branch of philosophy called metaphysics, which just deals with the fundamental structure of reality and tries to think about whether or not there are conceptual limits on the way that that structure might be. And you might think that that's just in itself a really important and interesting question, what the nature of reality is and whether or not that's something that we can work out just by thinking about it in our armchairs. But more importantly, we're going to be thinking about a specific branch of metaphysics concerned with the actual possibility of time travel, right? So we're going to be looking at a specific case study in that branch of philosophy. And you might just think that time travel and whether or not it's possible either in theory or actually in our universe is just an interesting enough question in itself that we should all care about it and get excited about it. So that's me trying to explain the sense in which all these different branches of philosophy that we're going to consider in this course are just different instances of pursuing this vision of philosophy as the activity of working out how to think clearly about the various different things that matter most to us and to our lives.